Initially, it was a missing persons case.
Well, I'm going to tell you right straight up, a king don't leave his kingdom.
He pulled out a big butcher knife and put it up to her throat and threatened to kill her.
He was a total maniac.
Beat and stabbed his own grandson.
Police found Martin's body. Someone had planted tomato plants on top of the shallow grave.
5 people charged with the murder of one person. Who did what? How were they connected?
This killing was unmitigated, unjustified, unexcusable.
I think he got what he deserved.
If you kill the devil, you're going to answer for it.
Today we're in Lunaweesee, Georgia, a peaceful town of less than 2,000. But in 1997, it was the scene of a murder involving 5 people and a man many say got exactly what he deserved.
Lunaweesee is the quintessential small southern town. It's a bedroom community outside of Hinesville. Not a lot of violent crime there. Basically a peaceful community.
Until what would come to be known as the Tomato Patch Murder, the town's main claim to fame was its reputation as the nation's #1 speed trap. It was a problem tackled by several governors, including one who ordered massive billboards erected to warn passing motorists.
Georgia ended up making a whole bunch of new traffic laws because of Lunaweesee. So it's kind of well known among the Georgia legal community.
But this sleepy Georgia town was about to become known to the law for another more sinister reason when in May of 1997, a 64-year-old retired trucker named Thurman Martin was reported missing.
Thurman Martin was a patriarch of a family. His daughter and her husband lived in a mobile home behind the home where Thurman Martin lived. The daughter's 2 children from a previous marriage also lived there as well. That would be Billy Crowder and Katie Crowder.
I received a telephone call from Billy Crowder, who is the grandson of Thurman Martin. He informed me at that time he had got up to go to school early in the morning. He came back home and his grandfather had not returned back home. He was very concerned, where his grandfather might be at this time.
Initially, it was a missing persons case. The sheriff's office in Long County had contacted us, likely contacted other stations, that they had an older gentleman that was missing.
But almost immediately, police became suspicious.
It's very unusual to report someone 3 or 4 hours before dark, so we suspected something just was not adding up.
The police only grew more suspicious after questioning family members. Katie Crowder, Thurman's granddaughter, told them 3 pairs of Thurman's pants were missing and suggested he might have left town.
So they wanted to lead us to maybe he had gone off with another truck driver out on the road. So we kept questioning people around town.
As police tried to determine who might have wanted Martin dead, the conversations kept coming back to the patriarch's treatment of his own family.
He was abusive from my point of view because, like I said, I've seen him over here at the shop with Billy. He's beat him in the face.
The people that you heard from, they all seem to say something negative about him. People claimed that they had firsthand knowledge of some of the abuse that had gone on against his daughter and his grandchildren.
But with nothing concrete connecting Martin's disappearance to his family, the Long County Sheriff's Department called in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Agent Ron Brooks was assigned to the case.
He was reported missing on May 18th, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation did not get involved until approximately 10 days later.
I got a call from the GBI agent, and he asked me, he said, you know anything about Thurman Martin being missing? I said, well, I'm going to tell you right straight up, a king don't leave his kingdom. You can look wherever you want to look, but I'm just telling you, I know this man. He didn't leave his throne because he was the king.
The authorities initially zeroed in on 2 members of the Crowder family.
When it happened, we really suspected the daughter Diane Crowder and the son-in-law John Stanton.
Diana and her husband John lived in a trailer just a stone's throw away from Martin's home. Stanton denied any connection to Martin's disappearance, but investigators found it harder and harder to ignore one thing.
The buzz around town of years of abuse that Thurman Martin may have inflicted on all of these family members.
One neighbor told police Diana had told her Martin could drop dead and that she would be the first one to put a cross on his grave. And Martin's son told investigators his daddy had whipped John Stanton 4 or 5 times and that John probably did it. But with no direct evidence of foul play, the investigation stalled until Ron Brooks got a call from Tony Shackelford.
Tony Shackelford was the girlfriend of Jason Jordan.
And Jason Jordan was a close friend of Thurman Martin's grandson, Billy.
Tony Shackelford indicated that her boyfriend may have been involved in the disappearance of Thurman Martin.
Jason Jordan and Billy Crowder had been friends for many, many years. Jason Jordan had been out of state and was talking with friends, telling them that he had witnessed a murder, that he had been a part of a murder.
We asked Jason Jordan to come in for an interview.
At first, Jordan said, "I did tell a friend that Thurman Martin was missing and that someone he knew may have killed his abusive grandfather." But Jordan said he'd lied because he just wanted to act big.
We asked Jason Jordan to take a polygraph, which he agreed.
Investigators asked Jordan questions like, "Did you cause any harm to Thurman Martin?" And "Do you know where Thurman Martin is located?"
The results of the polygraph showed deception.
When confronted with the polygraph results, Jordan started talking.
Jason Jordan stated that he was present when Thurman Martin was killed, and he subsequently gave us a 2-page confession.
Jason Jordan's confession led police back here to Ludowici, where they made a grisly discovery: the decomposing remains of Thurman Martin buried beneath a tomato patch.
It was a revenge story the national media couldn't resist.
Steps from the home he lived in, police found Martin's body wrapped up and buried in a 4-foot pit. Someone had planted tomato plants on top of the shallow grave to camouflage the area.
You're talking about the first week of July in South Georgia. As soon as I opened the door of the news car, the smell was all over the yard. The heat, the smell, the bugs stayed in my mind for years.
Based on Jason Jordan's confession and the discovery of Thurman Martin's body, police arrested not just Diana Crowder and John Stanton, but also Martin's grandchildren, Billy and Katie Crowder.
The family members accused of Thurman Martin's death returned to court Monday. His daughter Diane Crowder, son-in-law John Stanton, granddaughter Katie Crowder, grandson Billy, and their friend Jason Jordan. You're asking, how are 5 people charged with the murder of one person? Who did what? How were they connected? Who was involved to what level?
When we return, in a family where everyone seemed to want Thurman Martin dead, investigators try to separate the mastermind from the accomplice.
This was a multi-generational family plan to eliminate the patriarch.
After the body of Thurman Martin was found buried just yards away from his front door and covered in tomato plants, police had arrested and charged 5 people with his murder: 4 family members and a friend of Billy Crowder, Jason Jordan. 2 murder charges, however, were quickly dropped.
Thurman Martin's daughter Diane and granddaughter Katie were charged with being a part of this crime after the fact. Their involvement came cleaning up the house, helping dispose of the body, and then reporting him missing as well.
They both pleaded guilty to hindering apprehension of a criminal, and Katie was sentenced to 6 months in prison and 5 years of probation. Diana was found guilty but mentally ill and ordered to undergo a year of psychiatric treatment. The prosecution next turned their attention to Jason Jordan.
Jason Jordan would be an accomplice in this case. He was recruited by Billy Crowder and John Stanton to be a part of the shooting and the murder that night.
Jordan insisted that he hadn't been part of the killing, that he'd just helped with the cover-up. But unlike the Crowder family, he barely even knew the murdered man.
The prosecutors, they said he doesn't even have the defense of being a victim of this abuse. He's not a family member, but he's been a party to the crime.
Do you have anything to say?
Jason Jordan's trial for the murder of Thurman Martin was held here at the Long County Courthouse in Ludowici.
While Jordan was facing life in prison, many involved saw his trial as just the opening act before the main event.
The trial of Jason Jordan, that was almost kind of a prelude.
Del Kennedy reported on the Jordan trial for WTOC News in Savannah at the time.
From the start, prosecutors portrayed Jason Jordan as an active part in the 1997 shooting murder of Thurman Martin. I think both sides were waiting to see what the jury would do with Jason Jordan. He was sort of the barometer, so to speak, of how they would handle this case. They said he knew his friend Billy Crowder was planning to kill his grandfather. If a jury was sympathetic to Jason Jordan, would they be sympathetic to Billy Crowder and John Stanton and possibly acquit them? Defense lawyer Lloyd Murray contended that Jordan was merely a bystander. Jason Jordan's defense relied on peer pressure, that he was coerced by his friend and his friend's family to be a part of this. Jordan's defense team offered no witnesses during the trial.
Jason Jordan never testified in his own defense, but his confession was admitted into evidence. He told GBI agent Ron Brooks and Deputy Sonny Chambliss that one night at about midnight, he was at his house sleeping when Billy Crowder came over and they went riding around. They ended up at John Stanton's trailer where he saw a .22 caliber rifle and heard Billy and John talking about killing Thurman Martin. The three then walked over to Thurman Martin's house, with Billy entering first. Jason said that he stopped and waited in the kitchen. He heard multiple shots ring out, a pause, and then two more shots. John Stanton then appeared, tried to hand the gun to Jason and get him to shoot Thurman as well, but Jason refused.
He felt the pressure to be there and be part of it, but that in the end, he did not fire a shot.
The prosecution wasn't buying it.
Very cold-blooded. The evidence showed the man was asleep in his bed.
Prosecutors called to the stand two of Jordan's friends who claimed the defendant had bragged to them about taking part in a murder.
Even though he didn't pull the trigger, the fact that he did not withdraw, but instead went along for morbid curiosity was a sin that the jury had no sympathy for.
Jurors didn't take very long to convict Jason Jordan. They came back with that verdict pretty quickly, and he was convicted of murder. Jurors decided his actions were enough to earn him life in prison. Took just 20 minutes to find Jordan guilty. Their speed angered the defendant's family.
It was like he was convicted before he even got inside. And to me, it's not fair. They should have, the jury should have took longer than that to give a decision like that. You just can't whip somebody's life away like that, just like that. And it wasn't right to me.
In Long County, I'm Dale Kennedy, WTOC News.
When we return, Billy Crowder and John Stanton go on trial for the murder of Thurman Martin. Five people had been arrested for their part in the murder of Thurman Martin. Two pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact, and a jury found Jason Jordan guilty of murder.
But now the prosecution had to contend with two defendants who evoked far more sympathy than Jordan, the elderly and frail John Stanton and the well-liked 19-year-old Billy Crowder. Neither had a criminal record, and both appeared to have suffered for years under Thurman Martin.
It's unlike any other case I've been involved in. It's a very, very sad, heart-wrenching story.
John Cloy was asked to represent Stanton after his court-appointed lawyer bowed out just weeks before the trial.
I was expecting a younger man, but, once I learned that he was terminally ill, I think, and going through chemotherapy, I think that had a lot to do with why he looked so much older than he actually was.
During pretrial deliberations, it became apparent just how ill Stanton was.
He completely passed out next to me. And the judge thought he was faking, and the EMTs came and realized he was actually out, and so they rushed him to the hospital.
The prosecutors understood well the challenges they were facing, but sick or not, they intended to uphold the law.
This was a tough case from the standpoint that there was a human element there. You've got John Stanton, who sick with bone cancer. Then you've got now a young man, Billy Crowder. Then you've got Thurman Martin and all the allegations about what he had done. You've got a sad situation. But nevertheless, these people went in and unlawfully and without excuse killed someone, and that's what we have to deal with. I, along with Assistant DA Jay Dow, will be handling the case on behalf of the state.
Tom Durden was a damn fine trial lawyer. Authentic, unassuming, extremely intelligent.
All of this evidence, ladies and gentlemen, is going to show that this killing was unmitigated, unjustified, unexcusable. And at the appropriate time, I'm going to ask you to return a verdict which speaks the moral and reasonable truth of this case. That will be a verdict of guilty as charged on each count.
This was an execution where they served as, judge, jury, and executioner determining the fate of Thurman Martin. We were tasked with enforcing the law. You don't resolve your problems by killing people in their sleep.
The prosecution's case relied on the physical evidence, the ballistics, the guns that were used to shoot and kill Thurman Martin.
Indeed, a significant amount of the prosecution's case was devoted to showing that Thurman Martin posed no threat when he was executed, defenseless in his bed.
Here you see little adhesive markers, and they are pointing to some bloodstains that are located behind the headboard on the wood paneling.
One of the prosecution's first witnesses was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Martin, your autopsy, did you arrive at an opinion as far as the cause and manner of death?
Yes, sir.
Tell that jury, please.
This gentleman died as a result of 4 gunshot wounds to the head, and that the manner of death would be homicide.
As a result of your autopsy of Thurman Martin, is what you found consistent with the man having been shot in his sleep as he's laying down?
That's certainly possible, yes, sir.
But the strength of the prosecution's physical evidence paled in comparison to the impact of the confessions that came from the defendants' own mouths.
I got the case file, and the very first thing that hit me was my client gave a 27-page written confession. Okay, that was pretty startling, and it was in extreme detail.
John Stanton's statement was read in court by a GBA agent who was present during his confession.
He wanted each person to shoot Thurman so no one would say anything.
When I see a confession that's freely and voluntarily given, and they have a body.
Billy brought a shower curtain, and we lowered the body to the floor on the shower curtain.
It's case over, you don't stand a chance, really.
I know I've done a terrible thing that I went along with and should been mature enough not to let happen. How do you handle what he has done to his own flesh and blood? Thurman Martin has destroyed all of his family even after he is gone.
You're going to have to come up with some type of he deserved killing defense.
But John Stanton wasn't the only person on trial, and Billy Crowder, too, had given an even more detailed and incriminating statement.
Billy, when he got done with his polygraph, the polygraphist, Rodney Rentz, told us that there was some deception shown on the chart, and so we did a subsequent interview with Billy.
At first, Billy denied having anything to do with his grandfather's disappearance.
I had told him that I had received information that he had shot his grandfather. He first denied it and said, I didn't shoot my grandfather with no rifle. And I said to him, rifle? Who said anything about a rifle? How would you have known he was shot with a rifle unless you'd done it? Then he kind of sat back in his chair and kind of got tears in his eyes a little bit, and he said, I swore since I was 6 years old that I'd kill that man.
Billy proceeded to confess in detail to what had happened that fateful night. He told investigators that his grandfather had beaten him ever since he could remember. The final straw came one evening after Martin brutally beat Billy in front of a friend because he'd used the wrong wax on his car. It was then that Billy decided Martin must die. He told his father-in-law, John Stanton, and friend Jason Jordan his plan. All three would take turns shooting Martin so they'd stay forever silent about their shared guilty secret. The night of the murder, the three entered Martin's home with Billy in the lead, holding a rifle equipped with a homemade silencer. Billy crept into Martin's room, placed the barrel of the rifle against his grandfather's head, and pulled the trigger. He continued firing shot after shot until the gun jammed. After clearing the jammed rifle, he passed it to John Stanton, who fired 2 shots into Martin's neck. Stanton then passed the rifle to Jason Jordan, who changed his mind and refused to shoot, saying he's already dead. But while the confession seemed to be the final nail in the defendant's coffin, they also posed the prosecution with a significant risk.
There's no better proof than the culprit acknowledging guilt. The issue, though, with regard to their confessions was that there was a reason behind their conduct. On the one hand, while it was damning that we had the confession, it was damning with an asterisk because there was a because.
Coming up, while prosecutors appeared confident in public about their case against Crowder and Stanton, in private, they were much less certain that the facts alone would lead to a guilty verdict.
While we had confessions, while we had a body, while we had the forensic evidence, what could be perceived as a straightforward case was not, because of the countervailing concern posed by the alleged battered person syndrome.
You ever been hit with anything like that?
Yeah, I've been hit with that. I've been hit with 18-wheeler tire irons. One time he took and directly stabbed me with a screwdriver. It's across my shoulder blade out here is a copper screwdriver.
Without that as a defense, it would have been, oh my God, they killed him in his sleep. They shot him in his sleep. It's murder.
The prosecution had laid out a strong factual case that Billy Crowder and John Stanton were guilty of killing Thurman Martin. But those facts did little to hide the glaring weakness in the case: the actions of Thurman Martin himself.
We all knew from the time we were little children, growing up, that it is wrong to kill somebody.
Hal Peel, he was an easygoing attorney, very likable, very friendly, connecting with folks.
But you had at least 2 levels of wrong. It was wrong what Thurman Martin did to his own daughter, to his own wife, to his granddaughter, and to his grandson, and to John Stanton, and to everybody else, that he exhibited to them that he was just a mean son of a bitch.
I've heard people jokingly refer sometimes to one defense as an NK defense, needed killing.
I think he got what he deserved. And that is a harsh judgment.
He painted the picture of Thurman Martin as a horrible, abusive, evil man that was not going to change. And the only recourse that these poor family members, the victims of his alleged actions, the only recourse they had was to kill him.
The base law says if you kill somebody, you got to be punished. There's also a law that has evolved over the years, and Judge Russell will tell you about it, the law of justification. At the same time that this case came up, the Supreme Court had just come out with the Smith case, battered person syndrome, that sometimes people, as a human being, you can't take but so much. Which was the basis of our being able to use a battered person defense. And I submit to you that that night last year, Billy Crowder had had all he could take. John Stanton had had all he could take. When Billy Crowder, and he went into that room with that gun, folks, there were 2 fingers on the trigger of that rifle. There was Billy's and there was Thurman's. Because Thurman brought this on himself.
Battered person's defense came from Hal Peel. He shared that with me, and he shared with me that it possibly could extend, that my client fit in the same situation. So we were able to use that defense at the trial.
And in this state, contrary to what you were told by the prosecution, there are incidences where justification and self-defense are allowed. And if you're weak and you're infirm, and you've been picked on and abused to such a manner that you can't defend yourself, then you've got to decide at the end of this case whether it was justified.
The prosecution had used the defendant's confessions to prove them guilty. Now, the defense sought to use those same confessions to set their clients free.
You know of plenty of incidences, according to the statement that you read of John Stanton's, where Thurman Martin had repeatedly done acts of violence against him.
All I know is John Stanton stated in a statement that he had done that. I do not know for a fact whether Martin did or not.
And you also noted in that statement, you read it yourself, that he moved from Ludowici to Brunswick to get away from Thurman Martin, did he not?
Again, all I know is that was Mr. Stanton's statement.
The defense next put on an entire lineup of the defendant's family and friends who had witnessed Martin's abuse.
The defense brought forward really a cross-section of the community. They brought relatives forward who said that they had seen Thurman Martin abuse his family members.
They would, just always be real scared, and they'd be crying and so afraid, and a lot of times would come to our house and he would come hunting them.
I've seen him hit him with welding rods.
Approximately how hard would he strike Billy? Like that? Harder than that?
Yeah, so he just come around, and he'd strike him.
In general terms, what kind of person did you think Thurman Martin was?
Probably the cruelest man I ever met.
But the most chilling testimony came from Martin's granddaughter, Katie Crowder.
Katie probably had the most powerful testimony in the trial, I think. She certainly brought out more emotion than anyone could have.
I was afraid of him. I was afraid of what he'd try to do.
And what were you afraid he would try to do?
That he would try to rape me.
Okay. Did he, in fact, try that?
He tried several times.
Okay. Did he ever?
No, sir, because I fought him off.
Okay.
That was the scene that brought Billy to tears. When Katie got on the stand and talked about her grandfather trying to molest her, that was the point that he broke down and cried.
Katie Crowder's testimony painted a horrific life behind the doors of Thurman Martin's home.
He told my grandmother he'd kill her. She had really bad breathing problems and she had to use inhalers, and she was fussing and arguing with him back, and she went to get her inhaler and he took it and threw it across the room and threatened to kill her if she went and got it, and threatened to kill me and my brother if we went and got it. And he went to the drawer and he pulled out a big butcher knife and put it up to her throat and threatened to kill her right in front of me and my brother. She told us to call the police, and he said that if we called the police that he'd kill her right there and then he'd kill us.
If they tried to report him, if they tried to leave, if they tried to escape from him, they wouldn't get very far, and that he would bring them back and they would pay even worse.
When we return, John Stanton and Billy Crowder get their day in court.
He had me like this, and this is when I started saying, Jesus, help me. Jesus, help me. He said, that blankety Jesus not gonna help you none. I'm gonna go ahead and kill you.
Witnesses in the murder trial of Billy Crowder and John Stanton described horrific acts by Thurman Martin that the defense argued made the killing justified.
But while Billy Crowder had been abused by Martin his entire life, the same could not be said for John Stanton.
There was a little bit of abuse to my client, but it was not lifelong, and he voluntarily married into it. So I knew that was a problem.
Yet, while he may not have suffered a lifetime of abuse at the hands of Thurman Martin, Stanton's wife, Diana, had.
It was shocking. Her psychological problems were severe. I had run across an incident where outside of Long County, where he had abused his daughter, my client's wife, down at a fishing village in Darien, Georgia. And so my client had built up incredible problems with this guy for what he had done to his wife.
Once again, Stanton's seemingly damning confession provided him with a lifeline.
I don't think the state wanted that statement read.
Read by the GBI agent who questioned him, the confession detailed the horrors Stanton's wife experienced at the hands of her father.
Even when he raped Diana Crowder, he used the Bible to tell her that it was all right for him to have sex with his daughter because when the flood destroyed the earth, the one that remained slept with their children.
The defense next called on psychologist Daniel Grant to testify about the impact on Stanton of being helpless to defend his wife.
If you stop and think about it, the emotional impact of not being able to defend your wife, and he knew that this had been going on for all her life.
At a certain point, anyone in such a situation is going to snap.
They feel trapped or cornered, and they don't see. They feel like they've tried other options, and they feel that the end of their options. And this is this is at that time the only solution I have to essentially end the abuse.
I knew that the one thing that could save me would be if the people in the community were truly aware of what Thurman was doing. They might come out with a not guilty.
But while Dr. Grant testified on behalf of his client, Stanton's attorney knew their expert witness had a much better chance of convincing the jury to acquit Billy Crowder.
I thought that if the battered person syndrome was going to work, it was probably only going to work for Billy.
Now, Dr. Grant, in connection with your work in this case, have you had the opportunity to interview Billy Crowder and other people?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
He's experiencing what I would classify post-traumatic stress disorder, as far as feeling threatened or feeling like some serious imminent harm or even death would come to him. He was stabbed in the left shoulder by Mr. Martin one time with a screwdriver. He was repeatedly told that he was going to be killed. And so even when they did escape, there was really no escape because he would stalk them and find him. And also the reason he never left, because if one of them left, then he said, if any of y'all leave, then I'll kill the others.
While Dr. Grant provided critical testimony to support the defense's contention that Crowder and Stanton were justified in killing Thurman Martin, there was one more critical hurdle they had to overcome.
Georgia law says that if that's your only defense, then what you have to do is put up the defendant to show that the person suffers from battered person syndrome.
This meant that both defendants would have to testify, which was always a risky proposition.
When there's so much stuff happens to you, it's hard to sit down and remember little specific events unless they're so painful or so hurtful that you just is etched into your mind. That's why I brought out the tools with Gene and the tools with Billy. You ever been hit with anything like that?
That's just some moderate tools there. Yeah, I've been hit with that. I've been hit with 18-wheeler tire irons.
Will you please show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about how hard you would be hit and where you would be hit?
Like a wrench is right here. He'd sling it right there and spin, and just whatever force you put on, it hit enough, it'd leave a bruise.
And he would hit you?
He'd sling them at me. One time he took and directly stabbed me with a screwdriver. It's across my shoulder blade right here is a carburetor screwdriver.
But it wasn't the abuse directed at him that pained Crowder the most.
Everything he's done to me and my grandma, I've seen take my grandma, slap her in the back of the head, knock her false teeth out. He'd hit her that hard. I've seen her knock her down the floor, take his foot and kick her right here in the ribs. She's had numerous broke ribs. As her lung disease and all advanced, with all the medicine, got her skin got real brittle and anything. I mean, like you slap her real hard and the skin would just bust open he just slap her back or something and just like it'd be like blood up under the skin where it'd come up.
Did you ever see him do that?
Yes.
How many times?
I can't even count.
Billy, how did all this make you feel?
Well, let's see how it made me feel. How it also made me feel deep down, day in, day out, see my grandma abused, me abused, my sister abused. It made you feel like there's no hope because of the way he was or the way he proclaimed that he was around town, that nothing ever would be done to him.
After Billy had testified for nearly an hour, it was John Stanton's turn to take the stand, and he too told the jury about Martin's abuse.
He had me like this, and this is when I started saying, Jesus, help me. Jesus, help me. He said, that blankety Jesus not gonna help you none. I'm gonna go ahead and kill you.
But like Billy, it was the abuse of a loved one that hurt John the most.
He married Thurman Martin's daughter, who was much younger. He was really interested in taking care of her because he knew the trauma she'd been through and she really couldn't survive on her own.
They diagnosed her as a multiple personality disorder. And the doctor, which is Dr. Bill Tollison, said that she had been sexually abused since the age of 2 years old.
I really think John Stanton thought he was helping. I think he thought, I've been around long enough, I know enough, nothing's going to stop this man, and he's ruining these people's lives, and I'm seeing the long-term effect with my wife, and I know these kids are going to be the same way, and I need to do something about it because nobody's going to listen to me.
But lost in the focus on the murder of Thurman Martin was another troubling charge facing the defendants: armed robbery.
Armed robbery is a capital offense in Georgia. You can get a life sentence for it.
Billy claimed that there was money of his that his grandfather had taken from him and that he had taken it back after he was shot. It almost thought of an add-on charge that nobody had really thought about.
When we come back, the jury returns with a verdict, and Billy Crowder talks about life after the Tomato Patch murder.
Hey, for all y'all viewers, please, I highly recommend do not take the law in your own hands. It's a lose-lose situation. Trust me from experience.
John Stanton and Billy Crowder were facing life in prison for murdering the abusive Thurman Martin. Now, the jury was ready to determine their fate.
When the jury began deliberating against Billy Crowder and John Stanton, it took some time. And the longer it took, the more both sides and everyone out in the hallway and everyone on the front yard of the courthouse is wondering, what's going to happen with this?
Between your closing argument and the return of the verdict is the worst time in any trial.
The jury first read the verdict for John Stanton.
Where the jury found the defendant, John Stanton, guilty of the offense of murder, a felony.
I think seeing the trial as it went, I think he expected it.
All right, Mr. Stanton, please rise. Mr. Stanton, this is a complicated and a hard case. The jury has made a decision on the murder issue. There's no discretion that I have in that sentence. It's life, and I sentence you to life for the murder of Thurman Martin.
I don't remember him saying much at all. I think he was just in shock.
Jim Sherling was on the jury that sentenced John Stanton to life in prison.
Some of us kind of felt that John Stanton was a grown man and didn't have to be there. I think there were comments that were made that at least in prison he would get the right medication that he needed, get the care that he needed.
Next, the jury revealed Billy Crowder's fate.
Where the jury found the defendant, Billy Crowder, guilty of the lesser crime of voluntary manslaughter.
When they returned the verdict and they found him guilty of manslaughter, I breathed a sigh of relief.
I felt all along that it was voluntary manslaughter and not murder because of the circumstances behind why they did it. And I was glad that they gave us the option and was hoping it would end up being a lighter sentence. Billy was there and stayed there because of his sister. He felt he needed to be there for her.
Unfortunately for Crowder, the jury had one more serious charge to consider.
Count 2, where the jury found the defendant, Billy Crowder, guilty of the offense of armed robbery.
When they found him guilty of armed robbery, I felt terrible. I mean, it was just awful. I can't even, it was awful.
We felt it shouldn't have been an armed robbery charge, but they gave us no other option to charge him with, and he did take the money.
On voluntary manslaughter, I sentence you to 5 years, consecutive to any other sentence. On the armed robbery, I sentence you to life.
The armed robbery thing's a scary thing in Georgia. Every armed robbery trial I've ever seen come back with a guilty verdict is a life sentence.
If I had known that he could have gotten life for armed robbery, my decision may have went a different route. And I don't think I'm the only one that felt that way.
It's been over 20 years since the so-called Tomato Patch murder trial. John Stanton would never see the outside world again. He died after serving 7 years in prison. After serving over a decade in prison, not for the murder of his grandfather, but for stealing a few $100s from his wallet, Billy Crowder is out and still adjusting to his freedom.
This world out here is totally different than it was growing up. Just imagine stepping 15 years into the future. Nothing's the same. I mean, literally nothing. I'm still dealing with it every day.
After difficult years of readjustment, he's found a job he loves with people who know his past but accept him anyway.
We're a transmission shop and general repair, but mainly transmission shop. But Billy did come up and say to me, before you hire me, I want you to know who I am and where I've come from. So I was like, oh Lord, what are we getting into here? But he showed me a story, told me the story, and after seeing it, I knew Billy was going to work out with us wonderfully. He's a good guy. He's there day and night. He lives right across the street from us, so he's real easy to say, hey, my mother's got a flat tire, can you come help me? And he'll jump for he'll run right on over. You know, he's great.
They're like a family I never had or a family I wish I had. They've helped me so much.
My daughter, Christina Cricket, will talk with him, and I'll talk with him, and he tends to say that without us, he needs us.
We've got a common ground on certain things because I've gone through certain abuse and things with people.
Cricket, oh my God, she's been my little counselor. She's helped me through some very dark times.
He has his good days and bad days, like everybody does. Everybody has good days and bad days.
My friend of mine nowadays, I just want to be left alone. What years I got left, be happy.
From the time that Morgan went missing, it was 24/7 of just wondering if she was all right.
Disabled man beaten, kicked, and suffocated to death inside his home. A nationwide Amber Alert put this Florida teen in the hands of authorities.
He describes the acts that are incredibly violent.
They said that she was the mastermind. They called her the Blue-Eyed Devil.
There's no way this offense would have been committed by Morgan Leopard without Toby Lowry.
Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
Morgan Leppert was just 14 and lived in this Florida neighborhood when she met Toby Lowry, a much older man in his 20s with a criminal record. But despite her young age, it would be Morgan that police would cast as the mastermind behind a murderous attack during a robbery gone horribly wrong.
The case took place in Putnam County, Florida, which is north central Florida. It's very rural, kind of farmland. It's off the St. Johns River.
Morgan was born January 12th, 93. She was born in West Palm. We lived on 5 acres. She was always happy, loved animals, horses, swimming. I've always called her my sunshine.
She was delightful, just a sweet, happy little girl. Always loved being outside with the animals and bugs, and she had a lot of cousins to play with. She was the baby.
She's a very sweet girl. She always has been. So there was never any concerns about, we're worried about Morgan. Oh no, she's at it again. She never got in trouble for anything. I mean, I don't think she ever got in trouble in school.
That year, Morgan was 14, turning 15, and while most girls her age would be starting their freshman year of high school, Morgan was at home and being homeschooled by her mother, so her experience was not one that is typical for many girls who are physically in school all day long.
That's when Morgan met Toby Lowry.
Her little boyfriend that she had been seeing since the 8th grade. He was a friend of a cousin or something like that, and she met him in October of 2007. And she broke it off with her boyfriend, and Toby started coming around. And he was telling me how his stepfather had kicked him out of the house, and his mother was dying of cancer and didn't have any place to stay. I shouldn't have, but I told her he could stay in one of the other bedrooms until he found someplace else to go. He spent Thanksgiving with us and Christmas.
I met Toby on one holiday, I believe it was Thanksgiving. Seemed like a nice young man, looked very young. They told us he was 16 or 17.
A few months after Toby moved in, Morgan's mother, Jerry, made a disturbing discovery.
I happened to find a piece of paper with his name on it, and I looked at it, and it spoke of probation. And I thought that he was like 16, 17, and he was really like 21 or 22 at that time, and was a convicted felon. It was disturbing to think that he was that old messing around with, she would have been 14. So I told him he had to go. Stay away from Morgan. Don't come back.
But the two continued to see each other behind Jerry's back. And then one evening, Morgan failed to return home.
I knew that he hung out at a campground, and I went there trying to find her. And I couldn't find her, but I found a trailer that they said that he stayed in. And when I went in, that's when I found her phone, where it had been crushed with a hammer. I called the sheriff's department.
The police paid a visit to Toby's parents, who said that the two had stopped by and asked for a place to stay, but his parents had refused to take them in.
Not going to say they were being uncooperative, but just didn't want a whole lot to do with it. Toby had maybe burned some bridges there with the parents. A lot of us in law enforcement knew who Toby was. Some drug issues, burglary and thefts involved with Toby. The fact that she was with an older male, that was a concern for me. There's some questions there, whether it was a sexual relationship or what was going on there, which would be another crime in itself.
From the time that Morgan went missing, 24/7 of just wondering if she was all right, if she was dead, if she, was being raped. So many things go through your head.
Like, are they gonna try and find her? Or are they going to put like a message out? Oh, what about an Amber Alert, you know?
The police didn't believe, however, that the couple could have gone far.
Morgan and Toby didn't have their own transportation. Toby had always been in this area and lived in this area, and so felt that they were somewhere close.
The Putnam County Sheriffs notified local law enforcement to be on the lookout for the two. They also retrieved a record of the calls made to Morgan's cell phone.
In reviewing the cell phone records, I had noticed that a number from the Melrose area had called Morgan's phone. It belonged to a Mr. James Stewart who had lived on Cherry Lane.
Harrell and another detective drove to Mr. Stewart's house to determine why he had called Morgan's phone.
There was no car there. The house was locked up. Left my card on the door so that no one came through the door. Noticed that there was a handicap placard that was laying in the grass there. At the time, didn't think nothing more than, hey, the people who live here just aren't home.
Morgan's family began to fear the worst.
I mean, day after day after day went by, and there was nothing. I didn't understand why.
There was no Amber Alert, so it wasn't, known that she was missing. I mean, I was calling some of the news stations to see what I could do to get her picture on the news. I don't know what you have to do, but they wouldn't do anything to help me.
Then, on May 1st, Detective Harrell heard a call on the police radio that caught his attention.
I overheard on the radio that some officers were dispatched out to Mr. Stewart's home, which ultimately led to the discovery of Mr. Stewart's body inside the home.
Coming up, police are met with a horrifying scene.
A disabled man beaten, kicked, and suffocated to death inside his home.
After the family of a man named James Stewart called police worried about his well-being, officers showed up here to check up on him. One officer knew something else about Mr. Stewart's residence, which made the call even more urgent.
One of the last numbers to a called Morgan's cell phone was Mr. Stewart's home phone.
James Stewart lived on a secluded wooded property near the small town of Melrose.
He was born without hands. He had an appendage on one hand and nothing on the other, but was able to do anything he wanted to do. Was an excellent gardener. He took care of his family. He liked his cats. He was a very determined person, very self-sufficient, amazingly so, and very caring.
When Detective Harrell arrived at Stewart's residence, he found a murder investigation in full swing.
Mr. Stewart's body has been found deceased inside the home. It was a gruesome scene.
He was beaten, he was suffocated, and stabbed as well.
Detective Harrell immediately told investigators about the call to Morgan's phone.
Was then asked by our administration to go and find Miss Leopard.
And they told me that there was a person that was found dead. That was such a sickening feeling because I didn't know if she was dead too.
We had enough information because we had a vehicle that Morgan and Toby were possibly in, Mr. Stewart's vehicle that was missing. We're able to do an Amber Alert.
A nationwide Amber Alert put this Florida teen in the hands of authorities, cutting short a cross-country road trip with her adult boyfriend.
Anytime a crime like this targets an elder, somebody who is especially vulnerable, that's something that does gain a lot more attention and certainly adds to the heinous nature of the crime.
A police officer in El Paso had noticed Mr. Stewart's truck on the side of the road with 3 occupants. After the officer radioed in to confirm the identity of Morgan and Toby, the 2 were taken into custody for questioning.
At that point, some of the investigators with our office, Detective John Merchant, and some investigators with the state attorney's office flew out to Texas and interviewed Toby and Morgan.
The police questioned the couple separately. Initially, their suspicions were focused on Toby Lowry.
So obviously our first thought process is that, this older person is someone who has manipulated this young child into running away and being with them.
Initially interviewed as a victim, Morgan admitted that she had run away voluntarily to be with Toby.
Like you said, your mom said, well, you're going to be with him anyways, and you said, well, I'll just run away.
Pretty much, I just left. She didn't like the fact that I was with him, and I said I was going to be with him no matter what, and I ended up leaving. Yeah, but I wanted to get out of Florida. I got out of Florida.
Yeah, you got out of Florida. You got out of Florida, right? You got out of Florida and then some.
And my first time running away, I got pretty far.
But she denied knowing anything about James Stewart or where the truck came from.
Is that his friend's truck that he's in, that y'all were in?
I really had no idea.
You ever seen him in it before? You didn't ask him whose it was?
I really didn't care at the moment. I was just glad to get out of here.
Yeah.
They first talked to Morgan when she said she wasn't involved in anything and she didn't know anything about the murder. Then I think ultimately they went and talked to Toby when he made his first confession.
Toby was pretty forthcoming with everything as far as what happened.
I can only assume when he made that decision to speak in El Paso, Texas on May 4th to Investigator Robert Hardwick of our office, that he was going to tell the whole story, and he did. It is graphic. He describes acts that are incredibly violent.
Bam, 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 bam. Kicking his face into the wall. Before I know it, I done cut the mother clean to the bone, and there was chunks of brain coming out of his nose, cartilage coming out of his nose.
In his telling of what happened inside Stewart's house, the 22-year-old blamed the 15-year-old Morgan for making him do it.
She was like, baby, go in here and kill his ass. I'm like, oh, and I was like, man, no, man, I can't do this. I asked her, I was like, is this what you really want? She's like, yeah. Once we do this, we can take the truck and get the state.
Toby even described what he said was Morgan's role in the murder.
I walked in to the other section of the house for a minute, and I hear I turn around and Morgan's beating the shit out of him with this pipe. Never mind, I can't believe I'm telling you this. Because I swore in my mind that I wouldn't confess this to nobody, but
I never can understand how somebody can, after being told that they don't have to say anything to law enforcement, going out and laying out exactly what took place.
Armed with Toby's graphic confession blaming Morgan for instigating the murder, investigators returned to question Morgan in the juvenile facility where she was being held.
I had found an attorney in Jacksonville who sent via fax to question her as a victim only.
But when investigators returned to question Morgan, her attorney was nowhere to be found.
If your client is a suspect in a homicide, you don't let them talk to them without you being present. Even then, I wouldn't let them talk to them until I've spoken to them first. The attorney never met her.
We were all kind of dumbfounded that a lawyer is hired in a case. Law enforcement wants to go to him, and they don't bother to show up.
Once investigators told her that Toby had confessed to murdering Stewart, Morgan's story dramatically shifted.
how many times did you stab him with a knife?
I poked him. It didn't even go through, for God's sake. Toby shoved his all the way through. I didn't even shove mine all the way through. The most I did was when I had the pipes in my hands, and that was only hitting him in the face like 2 or 3 times.
Why, Morgan? Why did this happen?
I don't know. I told him I wanted to get out, and he said he was going to do whatever he had to do just to be with me.
Meanwhile, Leppert's family had gotten wind that Morgan was being interrogated as a suspect.
Assistant Public Defender in El Paso saw the detective interviewing Morgan and found out that the attorney had given permission and called Morgan's mother to say no attorney should be allowing their client to be interviewed by a detective on a homicide case without them being present. When they told me about it, it's my understanding from talking to the family that I turned beet red because I couldn't believe it.
Chris Smith was an attorney that we had found in Orlando. He was very confident, that everything would be all right.
Smith was hopeful he could convince the prosecution that they were focusing on the wrong person.
The prosecutors obviously took a very hard line toward her and felt that she was more in control and involved in this. I've had a lot of contact with her. I've spent a lot of time with her. She is very unsophisticated, very immature even for a young age. Never even crossed my mind that this case was ever going to go to trial because of her age. And because I knew the co-defendant had to be the one that perpetrated the homicide.
Then he learned that the district attorney was preparing to charge Morgan with first-degree murder as an adult.
I attempted to try to get the judge to release her, which was denied. And then very soon thereafter, adult charges were filed on her. So there was only one penalty for first-degree murder, and that was life imprisonment.
Smith flew to El Paso, still hoping to convince the district attorney to let Morgan plead to a lesser offense.
I just did everything I could to try to convince them that she deserved mercy, that they had misjudged her. She was not the one who was controlling the situation that had taken place.
But Morgan's second statement had hardened the prosecution against her.
It certainly seemed to me that Morgan was probably more the manipulator in this relationship and had maybe manipulated Toby into doing some of the things that were done.
And then the story was picked up by the national media.
When we look at cases of kids who kill, and particularly girls who kill, there's always a lot of media coverage. And the reason is because it's unusual. Then you've got the drama, she's with a boyfriend and they're on the run. And then you have the sad reality that the victim is an older, disabled man.
They said that she was the mastermind behind Toby killing this man, that he did everything she wanted him to do. I think they called her the Blue-Eyed Devil.
Because Morgan had been questioned as a juvenile with no lawyer present, Smith attempted to get her second statement thrown out.
They were seeking death on Toby. After I filed the motion to suppress, they cut a deal with him to testify against her. In exchange, they waived the death penalty, and he received a punishment of life in prison.
I have no idea why they made the offer. They had indicated that they were going to seek the death penalty. We were very happy when that offer was made, and I know Mr. Lowry was too.
She is so very young and could potentially have a productive life out there. We just felt at bottom line, when you look at the violence that she engaged in, that she physically with her own hands engaged in, you just have to treat her in the same as other offenders.
I was a homicide prosecutor here in Orlando. You take an oath and it says to do justice. It doesn't say do vengeance. And I felt like they were just doing vengeance, but I could not get the prosecutors to reduce the charge against her. So it was clear that we were going to have to go to trial.
When we return, the prosecution sets their sights on Morgan Leppert.
A woman and her 1-year-old son found dead in a park.
Now the child's father stands trial for their murders.
An ex-Border Patrol agent's life hangs in the balance in this high-stakes death penalty trial. The state alleges a lawsuit over child support was his motive for murder.
Court TV cameras will be inside the courtroom, capturing every dramatic moment.
The Mistress and Child Murder Trial. Live coverage starting Monday morning at 8/7 Central on Court TV.
After her boyfriend, Toby Lowry, took a deal to avoid the death penalty, Morgan Leppert's trial began here at the courthouse in Flagler County.
She was only 15, but in the eyes of the prosecution, Morgan had transformed from the victim of a potential sexual predator into the manipulative mastermind behind a gruesome murder.
She helped Toby do it. She scouted the place out for Toby, and then when they were in there, she tried to kill him. I mean, it comes down to that.
Because of the media attention surrounding the murder, the defense asked the judge for a change of venue.
I tried to get the judge to transfer it to Volusia County. He granted the motion, but he transferred it to Flagler County. The main population center of Flagler County is an area called Palm Coast, mostly retirement type, but are generally conservative, prosecution-oriented jurors.
Ultimately, Morgan's fate would be decided by only 6 jurors.
In Florida, if it's not a capital case, It's a 6-person jury. So that's right in the rules of criminal procedure. That's standard. That's not unusual. What is unusual is having a 6-person jury in a first-degree murder case.
No, sir, I would, of course, renew my objection to only allowing a 6-member jury to deliberate this case and assert that denies my client her right to a 12-person jury under the rules of criminal procedure under the Florida United States Constitution.
Okay, so noted.
That's why I filed a motion objecting to that, which was denied.
I've never heard of something like that. To have 6 men decide the fate of her life.
The prosecution wasted no time in portraying Morgan as the driving force behind Stewart's murder.
The defendant, Morgan Leppert, ran away from home to be with her boyfriend, Toby Lowry. They were sleeping in the woods near Mr. Stewart's home. There was a mattress on the ground that they were sleeping on. Her nor her boyfriend had any transportation, they had no money, and they had no prospect of getting any until they came across James Stewart. On April the 25th of 2008, the defendant chose to execute a plan to case Mr. Stewart's home. In other words, she concocted a ruse to gain access into Mr. Stewart's home to find out what stuff he had that they could steal.
The prosecution alleged that Morgan knocked on Stewart's door asking for help.
Mr. Stewart came to the door. She asked him. She used the phone to call her mom. To prove the adage that no good deed goes unpunished, Mr. Stewart let the defendant in. She didn't call her mom. She didn't call the police.
Instead, prosecutors said that Morgan called a number she knew no one would answer. Her own phone. The one that lay crushed in Toby's trailer.
She continued her mission to size up Mr. Stewart and the size of the contents of his home.
Prosecutors claimed that later that day, the two entered Stewart's home through an unlocked side door, Toby arming himself with a knife he found inside, and Morgan with 2 metal pipes.
Toby Lowry barged into the room, pointed the knife at Mr. Stewart, and demanded the keys to his truck. The defendant chose to stand by his side with those metal pipes in her hand as an added show of force.
When Stewart resisted, Toby went berserk. He punched Stewart in the face, breaking his glasses and knocking him to the ground. He then proceeded to stomp on Stewart's throat before taking the knife and stabbing him repeatedly in the chest.
The evidence is not going to simply show that Toby Lowry acted alone, that Morgan Leppert in this case was simply an innocent bystander.
The prosecution alleged that Morgan willfully took part in the attack, hitting Stewart several times with a pipe and attempting to stab him as well, then getting a plastic bag from the kitchen that Toby ultimately used to suffocate and kill Mr. Stewart.
The evidence will show that Morgan Leppert found the keys that they came into that house to get, and she took those keys. The evidence is going to show that Morgan Leppert found the victim's wallet in his shorts pocket and found over $100, which she took.
According to the prosecution, the entire course of events was driven by the 15-year-old Morgan, who manipulated a naive Toby to help her get out of the state.
Now, the defendant had the means to accomplish her desire to get out of Florida. And so Toby Lowry and Morgan Leppert got into that truck and they headed toward Gainesville.
Toby Lowry is, in some ways, he's very personable. I think he's very impulsive, obviously, from the facts of this crime. And he was somebody very much in love with Morgan Leppert.
After leaving Stewart's house, Morgan and Toby stopped at a Love's gas station to refuel before picking up a hitchhiker who traveled with them for several days before they were stopped by police in Texas.
When you listen to Mr. Bruckner, our traveling type person from that they picked up in Georgia, and he was so helpful to lay out the entire relationship
Did they appear to be definitely a couple in love in your eyes?
Yes, I would say. I mean, they were a couple. Yeah, there's no questions about that.
What did you observe as far as the way the defendant treated Toby Lowry?
She smacked him several times while we were in the truck, while he was driving down the road. She seemed to be in control of him more than anything.
What was her mood during this 4 to 5 days?
Usually she was pretty happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When we see that interaction, that they are literally boyfriend and girlfriend, not captor to captive. And again, she has access to the phone. Anytime in the world she could pick up the phone, leave. It's that simple.
Coming up, the defense faces a long road ahead.
The phrase that I would use is one my grandfather used to use. I did feel like I was pushing a Cadillac up a hill with a rope.
With the prosecution seeking to convict Morgan of first-degree murder, her lawyer, Chris Smith, was the only person standing between the 15-year-old and life in prison without parole.
I was very nervous going to the trial because I'm always nervous. And also I'm representing this child in case where the evidence was, because of her statement, overwhelming. There were things working in her favor. There was her age. She was under the age of consent.
It's not reasonable to expect a child of her age, her lack of education, the fact that not only was she supposed to be in 9th grade, she didn't even make it through 8th grade. There is a reason we don't allow our children to make certain decisions. The reason that we seek to protect them from making decisions.
Smith argued that if Morgan was too young to consent to sex with Toby, a legal adult, she was too young to be held responsible for what happened while in his care.
You get information that a 15-year-old child has run away from home. Does that person have the ability to consent to do that act?
I don't object as to relevance at this point. What's relevance?
The relevance is explaining that a 15-year-old does not have the ability to consent to have sex, and certainly doesn't have the ability to consent to run away from home with a 22-year-old man under Florida law. He's a trained law enforcement officer, and he can render that opinion.
The statutes do not speak to her ability to consent. What it says is that the consent doesn't matter.
There's this great hypocrisy. We say we don't want to let children who are under a certain age make decisions. We recognize they're immature. We have to protect them. We have these laws where you can be prosecuted for having sex with a 15-year-old, even if you're a 16-year-old boyfriend, and make those people a sex offender. And then when you get an exact situation where she should be protected, where she does get involved and the facts become obviously bad, and a horrendous situation takes place, then suddenly she's not worthy of being protected anymore.
Toby Lowry, Smith argued, was the adult who was responsible for what happened next.
Common sense tells you, and everything you heard from the evidence in the case shows you that there's no way this offense would have been committed by Morgan Leppert without Toby Lowry. She didn't know the house. She didn't know Melrose. She didn't have the violent capabilities. But Toby could have committed this offense without her. And as such, her participation was unnecessary.
There was no indication that Morgan had ever been in trouble or associated with criminal activity until she became involved with Toby Lowry.
And while the attack on Mr. Stewart was brutal, there was little evidence that Morgan's alleged participation in that attack contributed directly to his death.
I mean, he killed Mr. Stewart. She didn't.
There was nothing that they were presenting that really proved anything against Morgan. DNA, fingerprints, things like that. There was just nothing that seemed like they really had proof of.
Although DNA testing showed that the blood on the murder weapons was from Mr. Stewart, police somehow failed to dust them for fingerprints.
Referring to Exhibit 11 in evidence this night, you took two DNA swabs in this, correct?
Correct.
One would be of the blood to determine, if you could, whose blood was on there, correct?
That's correct.
One would be probably the handle to see if there was any DNA left on the handle of the person who may have wielded the knife.
Yes, sir.
And it would also, the handle would also, or knife itself would also be processed for prints after the DNA testing, correct?
It was not submitted for prints, no, sir.
Okay, so just the DNA
Just
swabs.
the DNA, yes, sir.
Smith also pushed back on the idea that Morgan could have just walked away.
Well, he was physically superior to her. She just witnessed him commit an incredibly violent crime, knew what he was capable of doing. Why would you anger somebody like that? Why would you try to run away from them?
Having not walked in her shoes, having not been a 15-year-old girl, living out in the woods for 4 days with a man she purportedly thought she loved, it's so easy for them to come back 15 months later and say, oh, that's not what we would have done. We would have just turned around and walked right out of there.
There was one strong piece of evidence that supported Smith's argument that Toby was the driving force behind Mr. Stewart's death. Toby's own words laying out his violent attack.
I hit him. He fell backwards. I shattered the glass of the glasses like into his eye.
He knew what he did. He'd already seen his discovery by the time he gave his deposition. You admit what you can't deny and deny what you can. And that's what he was doing.
He's out here in the country. Ain't nobody gonna hear I was like, babe, what the you want to do? She was like, honestly? I'm like, yeah, honestly. She's like, I say we go open that house while he's in there and beat the out of him, do what the gotta do.
So the 22-year-old grown man is listening to the 4'11", 89-pound, 15-year-old girl.
But the jury never got to see that video.
The only way his interview could have been played in court was if Toby had been called as a witness.
Ultimately, the prosecution decided against calling Toby to the stand.
Well, I was surprised they didn't call him because they made the deal with him. So if you really felt like he was that important, why didn't you call him as a witness?
I think both sides were going back and forth on that issue. And well, you know what, the case is still pending. I probably don't want to get into that.
I regret not calling him. I don't know that it would have made a bit of difference. It wouldn't have taken away that interview Morgan gave in El Paso.
Coming up, Morgan's words and laugh come back to haunt her.
Whenever I get nervous, I laugh, and a lot of that was on camera, so it made me look like I wasn't remorseful.
15-year-old Morgan Leppert was facing the rest of her life in prison after implicating herself in the murder of James Stewart. Now, the prosecution was preparing to play the incriminating audio of that admission to the jury. Through it all, Morgan's supporters remained optimistic.
Nobody said there was anything that Morgan did had anything to do with the man dying.
I remember meeting with the family after the first day of the trial and talking to them. They were somewhat upbeat. And I explained to them that tomorrow's not going to be a good day because I knew the statement was coming.
The prosecution first called Chris Middleton, the detective who interviewed Morgan on May 3rd and May 5th.
Can you please state your full name and occupation for us?
Christopher Middleton. I'm an investigator assigned to the state attorney's office.
Okay. What location did you speak with the defendant?
This was at the El Paso Police Department.
Okay. What time was this?
It was around 10 o'clock, 10:30 in the evening, El Paso time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In the May 3rd video, taken in El Paso, Texas, we see Morgan giggly, playful, certainly acting as a child. One, it's unique in that she's just killed somebody and has no concern in her mind for that. But the minute he leaves, she drops that demeanor. She gets a sullen look on her face like, oh my gosh, I'm caught.
After Toby confessed and police interviewed Morgan a second time, they alleged that her true personality came through.
Did you again speak to Ms. Leppert?
On May 5th, yes, sir, I did.
Okay. Was her demeanor or behavior changed at all in between the two interviews?
She came off as an adult. It went from a cute, young, innocent schoolgirl to a person who was fully aware of what was going on.
The prosecution played the audio recording of Morgan's second interview to a completely silent courtroom.
I poked him. He didn't even go through, for God's sake. Toby shoved his all the way through. I didn't even shove mine all the way through. The most I did was when I had the pipes in my hands, and that was only hitting him in the face like 2 or 3 times.
Why, Morgan? Why did this happen?
I don't know. I told him I wanted to get out, and he said he was going to do whatever he had to do just to be with me. The guy was a pervert, for God's sake. He deserved what he got. For God's sake, you went to his house and all you seen was his teenage girl with porn everywhere. The guy was disgusting.
But it sounds cold. It sounds chilling. You could see that did not sit well with the jurors' faces. I couldn't tell you exactly what their faces were, but I've seen enough jurors' reactions to think evidence that comes in, they were offensive statements because he didn't deserve it.
As Smith felt the tide turning against Morgan, the pressure of trying to save the 15-year-old from dying behind bars became overwhelming.
I started having severe headaches, and my blood pressure was 194 over 120, and I was about to stroke out. I had to get injections to complete the trial because I was so upset.
But if the prosecution was going to rely on Morgan's statement to convict her, then Smith was going to use that same statement in a last-ditch effort to save her.
She'd struck Mr. Stewart with this aluminum curtain rod. Indicates in her statement that was done at the direction of Mr. Lowry, correct?
Yes.
I grabbed the keys and Toby kept on hitting him. And he's like, come on, baby, come on, hit him.
And at one point she indicated in the interview that Toby had directed her to take the bag and put it over Mr. Stewart's head and suffocate him, correct?
Yes.
But she refused to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, Toby told me to do it. I said, no, I'm not doing that. So he grabbed the bag and...
Did you go get the bag for him?
Because I had gotten one to get some change, I think, and I had an extra one and I had dropped it on the floor.
Why did you have to take the truck without having to kill Mr. Stewart? Without killing Mr. Stewart?
I don't know, we weren't thinking. He figured if we did take it, he didn't want the guy seeing his face because we were already in the house.
And when you asked her, were you forced to go along with it? Her response was, I listened to what Toby said. Toby told me to, and I did what he said.
Yes.
Toby did it all. Beside me, and Toby did all of it.
You hit him with the pipe, though, right?
Yeah, but Toby made sure he was dead before we left.
Finally, Smith reminded the jury how Morgan's second statement had been obtained in the first place.
At no time at the beginning of that interview did you indicate to her that you were inquiring of her as to what possible involvement she might have had in a homicide, a burglary, a robbery, or a grand theft auto, correct?
No, sir, I did not.
In fact, repeatedly throughout the interview, she's having conversations with you about wanting to go home.
Yes.
Correct? You're telling her you're going to take her home.
Correct.
You're going to fly her home personally.
Yes, sir.
Correct. And she's telling you she wants to get back home, get to see her mother, get back to her room.
Yes, sir.
Sleep in her bed.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I was merely just trying to focus on the fact that she was under this man's control. She was not the one running the show.
Coming up, the jury retires to deliberate.
I was watching the clock because I knew the longer they're out, the better chance we had. It was not a long deliberation in my mind for a first-degree murder case.
After deliberating for just a few hours, the jury returned with the verdict.
Okay, Madam Corporal, to show the jury is now seated. Members of the jury, have you reached the verdict?
Yes, sir, we have.
Okay, would you please hand the verdict form to the bailiff? Would the defendant please rise for the verdict?
State of Florida versus Morgan Amanda Leppert, defendant. Case number 2008-1171 CF. Verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Morgan Amanda Leppert, as follows. As to count 1, guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment. As to count 2, guilty of burglary with assault or battery as charged in the indictment. As to count 3, guilty as charged in the indictment of robbery with a deadly weapon. So say we all, dated at Bunnell, Flagler County, Florida, this 13th day of August 2009.
I didn't believe it at first, but I remember being on my knees. I remember falling. I remember being in Chris's arms. I remember looking back at my mom saying, I'm sorry.
When they said Morgan was guilty, you don't believe it, that you're hearing right. For them to think what they thought of her, it blows your mind.
Well, obviously very disappointed. I'm always disappointed anytime I get a verdict like that. Morgan has several legal issues. This case is not over. We have the sentencing coming up, and then, of course, we'll file an appeal.
But Florida law left little doubt about Morgan's sentence.
State of Florida then, removing the death sentence, left only one option for the judge, and that was to sentence her to life without parole if found guilty.
It's the most heartbreaking case of my career. It's still one that sticks with me more than any other. Anytime you lose a case and your client gets sentenced to life, you second guess everything you did during the trial.
Morgan Leppert has now spent half of her life behind bars. Her mother, Jerry, still visits her as much as possible and refuses to give up hope that one day her daughter will go free.
I almost feel like, because of my decisions and relationships and bad choices, maybe that's why Morgan was looking for love in the wrong place. So the guilt never goes away. I wake up thinking about her. I go to bed thinking about her.
My backbone is my mom. People would criticize her of being a bad mother. She never was. It was me being young and stupid, wanting to run away with a boy.
When Morgan was found guilty, there was no hope she'd ever be released from prison. But that changed in 2012.
After Morgan was sentenced, the U.S. Supreme Court did make a determination that a juvenile couldn't receive life imprisonment without some type of access to be released.
At her first resentencing hearing, the judge again sentenced Morgan to life, but with a key difference.
The judge did not sentence her to life without parole. She has the opportunity for a review of her sentence. So that's a big thing, because it leaves open hope.
I hope if she gets out as soon as she can possibly legally get released. She committed a crime. There are consequences. I think these consequences were too severe.
Media from the attorney.
When there is a hearing, if I'm around, I'm going. Whenever it is, I'll be there, assuming I'm on the planet.
I wish I could change it all. I was young and dumb and manipulated by a grown man. If I could take it all back, I would. That they hope one day they forgive me. I just hope they find it in their hearts to forgive me.
in East Orlando, the neighborhoods are quiet, the streets safe, and the house is peaceful. Yet the home behind us conceals a terrible secret, one which still haunts the family that used to live here decades later.
Richard and Marilyn Kinanen seemed like a typical happy couple when they first married.
I've seen a picture of Richard and Marilyn when they were very young. They were beautiful. They were a gorgeous couple. He was a handsome man.
But life soon turned dark for Marilyn.
Richard broke Marilyn's arm while she was pregnant with their first child. Richard beat Marilyn from the beginning, is my understanding. He would kick her in the head, kick her in the stomach. She was bloody regularly. At one point, he tried to drown her in the pool in their backyard. He held her underwater with his foot on her head.
The couple eventually had 3 children, Ricky, Cheryl, and Stacy.
They didn't call him Dad. They called him It or the Monster. Stacy's telling of him is that he was huge. He was over 6 feet tall, over 300 pounds. Stacy described his eyes, that he had black eyes like a shark. He used to play Russian roulette with the kids. He would take a loaded pistol and spin the barrel and put it up against their head, and click, 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 click.
And then one September day, he simply vanished.
This happened in 1988. Cheryl had moved out by then. It was just Marilyn and Stacy in the house. Stacy came home from work one day and her mother told her he's gone. And she didn't have any explanation. She was very calm about it.
It doesn't appear that anyone missed Richard Sr. His wife didn't call the police. His kids didn't say anything about it. He was just gone.
Marilyn's middle daughter, Cheryl, had married and lived nearby.
Until my father was gone, I don't think any of us thought we were ever going to be able to breathe or live. Even if we didn't live in the house, he always found us.
Once she was free from the monster, Marilyn opened up. She lived a normal life.
She blossomed into this person that I think she always was this person.
Marilyn's youngest daughter, Stacy, also remained in Orlando and soon fell in love.
Susan's a little older than Stacy, but they became good friends. They weren't looking for a romance with another woman. They just fell in love and decided, well, this works for us.
But life for Ricky Kinanen, Marilyn's eldest son, hadn't gone as smoothly.
Ricky was the first child. He was the only child for about 8 to 10 years. And so he, of course, got the brunt of the abuse.
Richard was a loner. He was gone a lot. Stacy and her girlfriend bought a house down the street from the mother's house. And then Richard moved in with them. It's a block away.
It was nice to come home to a cooked meal. And, they'd have game nights. They would go out to dinner and a movie.
I think we started to relax and we started to breathe, and it was a good feeling.
But then, 15 years to the day after her husband vanished, Marilyn fails to show up for work.
She worked for a training academy for Delta employees, and she had been there 20 plus years. According to everyone who knew her, she was there early every morning. She was a very loyal and dependable employee. She had never done anything like this before.
When Marilyn's coworker called Cheryl and said she didn't show up for work today, they all met at Marilyn's house. Ricky was the only one who had a key to the house.
For the siblings, Marilyn's sudden disappearance could mean only one thing.
Ricky was telling the girls, he came back. The nightmare is back. He's got her. So Cheryl and Stacy immediately began to panic.
The last thing my dad ever said to me was, someday, somewhere, I'll get you. And I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill somebody that you care about.
On the counter were papers from the Social Security Administration, and the coffee pot was left. There was all this disorder that they knew was not in their mother's personality.
I stood in the kitchen by the refrigerator, and I got goosebumps, and I said, something's wrong. Something's terribly wrong.
They called the police, and the police came to the house. Cheryl did most of the talking, but Ricky and Stacy were there in the room while the police report was filed.
But with no signs of a forced entry or foul play, the detectives could only report Marilyn missing. And that might have been the end of it.
For a couple of months after Marilyn disappeared, a new detective got this case. His name was Mark Hussey.
Because of Cheryl's constant calling the sheriff's office and wanting to know what are you doing to find my mother, the case was given to me. I began to look into it.
This was Detective Hussey's very first murder case. He was just this gung-ho rookie cop who wanted to make a name for himself.
Cheryl knew something about the bank records, and so she provided us with some of the accounts and the names, and so we started to look into those, and there was a lot of money changing hands.
And it wasn't going into the hands of Marilyn's missing husband. Marilyn's money was going to Ricky and to Stacy.
There were checks being written electronically from an off-site computer that went to Stacy and Richard, but nothing to Cheryl and her kids. They paid off their vehicles, and Richard went out and paid cash for a brand new Dodge truck. I think about $40,000 worth.
It was the first of many clues that would convince the police to shift from a missing persons investigation to an active murder investigation focusing on two of the Cunanan siblings, Stacy and Ricky.
If your mother's just missing, the assumption is that she's going to come back at some point. I mean, you don't start remodeling the house and taking all the furniture out of there and stuff like that.
Cheryl also started to get suspicious of her brother and sister.
Mark had called me and he said, "Did you get money from your mom?" No. Well, Stacy and Ricky did. And Stacy and Ricky have new cars. And Stacy and Ricky did this. And Stacy and Ricky did that. And it was all with my mom's stuff.
The last straw for Cheryl was the garage sale.
It was a Saturday morning. There was a yard sale going on. Some of the items that they were selling were Disney collectibles, little statues and plates and pins and things like that.
He saw that Stacy and Susan were having a garage sale and selling Disney collectibles. And he knew that Marilyn's house was full of Disney collectibles, so he called Cheryl and said, "Your sister is selling your mother's stuff."
I don't know if I thought that they had hurt her, but I knew that their stories were not adding up very quickly. And there came a point during the investigation that I was sure they knew what happened or where she was.
I called the bank and I said, "Let's put a hold on that account and let's see how long it takes them to contact us." I believe it was that same day that someone had called and asked why their account had been frozen. They left a phone number here in Orlando, called them back, and of course, Richard Gannon answered the telephone.
Detective Hussey asked Ricky to come in and just have a conversation, and Ricky volunteered for Stacy to come in. They interrogated Stacy in a separate room. At the end of Stacy's questioning, that's when they just sort of dropped a ball on her that, your brother had something to do with this. So they brought her into his room, closed the door behind them, and just let them talk.
It's a technique that we frequently use. We'll put suspects together in a room, and sometimes they talk to each other. They sit there, and a lot of times they will make incriminating statements.
So Stacy and Richard are together in this interrogation room. They're whispering back and forth across the table. At one point, they hold hands and look at each other intently. Now, some of that's audible, not all of it. Richard at one point seems to say, "It's the gas chamber for me."
The problem was for us that day is that they were whispering. We couldn't hear it.
And eventually they just let them go. They just let them go.
Unbeknownst to them, police had put a tracking device on their vehicle. They go buy NyQuil and sleeping tablets and go to one of Richard's storage units. They ran an exhaust hose into the car. They took the NyQuil, they took the sleeping medication.
They each scrawled a short suicide note. Ricky tells Cheryl that he loves her, and Stacy says goodbye to Susan, writing, "We had a part in Mother's leaving."
Everything was on track until police arrived.
We got a phone call from my sergeant, and he said, "We just picked up Richard and Stacy. They tried to commit suicide." They were on their way to the hospital, and we sent 2 detectives over there to interview them. I don't think they got too much from Stacy, but Richard was more forthcoming.
Upon being questioned by investigators in the hospital, Richard confesses not just to the murder of his father, but also to the murder of his mother.
He told us that his father was buried at the mother's house and that their mother was buried in their backyard over on Okaloosa Avenue. Mr. Kananen was buried deep in the ground, I'd say 6 or 8 feet deep. He was wrapped in a plastic tarp and then also wrapped in his bedclothes, sheets and things. He was killed in his bed, shot in the back of the head. Based on what Richard had told us, we knew where to look for Mother. She was buried in a very shallow grave. She was wrapped in plastic garbage bags and then duct taped. The autopsy revealed that her mouth and nose had been duct taped also. We also found some taser darts. She was tased prior to being suffocated.
With a confession in hand, the police arrest Ricky and charge him with the murder of both Marilyn Kananen and Richard Kananen Sr. Investigators then turn their attention to Stacy, who they are convinced is an accomplice to both murders, perhaps even the mastermind.
When she woke up in the emergency room, immediately, as soon as her eyes started fluttering, detectives were asking her questions. Did you kill your mother? Did you kill your father? They thought she might have something to do with it, but there was no evidence. There was nothing to legally keep her confined in any way, so they let her go home.
Detective Mark Hussey clearly is dead set on getting Stacy for this murder. He's convinced that she was involved in her mother's killing.
You know, it's pretty plain what she says. She says, Ricky and I had something to do with Mom's leaving. Well, Mom didn't leave. Mom was buried in the backyard at her house. There was never any doubt in my mind that she knew exactly what was going on. I said to her, I know that you were involved in this, and at some point, I'm coming after you. You're going to be arrested for this.
Coming up, the state of Florida sets a date for the trial of Richard Kananen Jr. for the murder of his parents.
On May 1st, 2007, everyone was ready for the murder trial of Richard Kananen Jr., but he surprised everybody when he took a plea deal.
The day that she found out was the day that the police showed up to arrest her.
At that point, Stacy Kananen is arrested and charged with the murder not only of her mother, but also with her father's murder.
Just weeks before Ricky Kananen was to go on trial for the murder of his mother, he accepts a plea deal from prosecutors. 30 years in prison in exchange for testifying that his sister was a willing accomplice to murder.
You know, the case raised my eyebrows from the beginning because she's indicted within days of Richard having taken this plea and told his umpteenth version of this story. There was just clearly no evidence, nothing to back up Richard's story. I want you to pay attention to what evidence existed and when, because the only thing that changed between them only having a case against Richard in December of 2003 and Stacy being arrested for murder in May of 2007 is that her brother decided to weave his fifth version of what had happened.
Diana Tennis was a very accomplished local attorney. She held her own.
But the prosecution had 2 siblings who were prepared to testify that Stacy was complicit in the murders of both her father and mother.
I was told by the detective that my father had been shot in the back of the head, and he was sure that my sister had done it because she was the only one around at the time.
The lead prosecutor in this case was Robin Wilkinson. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, September 10th, 2003, Marilyn Fernandez, a mother of 3 children, left her work at the Delta Connection Academy to never be seen again. She's frankly a little attack dog. You know, she's not going to cut anyone any slack. Ladies and gentlemen, please be accommodated in the fine. The prosecution had to sell to the jury this idea that Stacy's behavior after her mother's disappearance was not reasonable. State called Cheryl Bracken. The takeaway from Cheryl Cannon's testimony was really that her siblings seemed completely unconcerned about their mother's disappearance. After your mother was missing, are you still calling the sheriff's office all the time?
Constantly.
Does your sister Stacy ever call you to talk about your mother?
Never.
What about Richard?
Never.
They didn't do any of the normal things that one might expect from children looking for their missing elderly mother.
But the most damaging testimony would be Ricky's.
The prosecution's case was based almost entirely on Richard Cannon Jr.'s testimony. State call Richard Cannon. The moment Richard Cannon Jr. entered the courtroom is really memorable to me still. We knew that Richard Jr. had struggled mentally, that he lived in a very dark and violent reality in his mind.
You solemnly swear.
He was unshaven. He really played the part of this crazy guy living in his own reality. Mr. Cannon, did you kill your mother?
Excuse me?
Did you kill your mother?
Yes, I did.
And was someone there to assist you in killing your mother?
Yes, there was.
And who was that?
Stacy, my sister.
Robin had to prove that Stacy was a willing and full participant in the murder of a mother. She wasn't a coerced accomplice. And when you were planning to kill your mother, what did Stacy say and how she wanted to do this?
She just wanted her dead.
Richard says that both planned the killing, took their mother out for a movie and dinner. Do you remember what movie you saw?
Yeah, Charlie Angels 2.
Came back to the house and they were talking like nothing was going on. Stacy, though, had a taser. They were all standing around talking. She tased her mother. Where were you when Stacy tased your mother?
I was sitting down at the breakfast nook counter.
Her mother falls to the floor and Richard then pulls out a bandana. Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, how did you suffocate your mother?
Took a bandana and put it over her mouth and her nose.
When do you pull the bandana up?
After a while.
Why'd you pull it off?
There wasn't no breathing.
As he describes Stacy using the taser on her mother, him suffocating her, Stacy at the defense table begins to crack just a little bit. She's been very composed up until this point. It was the first time that we'd really seen emotion from her. What was your sister doing as you're suffocating your mother?
She was standing over there, over me.
During the trial, when he was testifying, he looked at my sister a lot. I think he never thought that my sister would be free this long. And he was finally doing the right thing.
Did you carry your mother by yourself?
No, Stacy helped me carry her.
Once you put her in the trunk, what did y'all do?
Drove to the storage area where we had freezer. Or put her in the freezer, parked the car in the storage area and went back to the house.
One of the really telling pieces of evidence, according to prosecutors, is the suicide note.
The suicide note was a problem. I mean, that certainly is not a piece of evidence that I went in thinking, oh, they're totally going to understand why it is she would do this without it being an acknowledgement of guilt or, oh my gosh, I killed mom.
When you wrote this part of the note, was the rest of the page blank?
Yes.
This portion here, whose handwriting is that?
Stacy's.
I go into every trial believing that it's winnable. On the other hand, part of your job is to assess likelihoods so that people can decide, should I take the offer on the table or go for broke? Part of the job is giving people a real good, honest, objective assessment of that. I thought there was a very good chance we could lose.
When we return, the jury hears horrifying testimony about the Cananans' father, Richard Sr.
We went in the bedroom, he locked the door, he pulled out a handgun.
It's a mystery that's captivated the nation.
This stretches just so beyond what anyone could imagine.
And left a trail of dead bodies.
Lori Vallow Daybell, accused of triple murder, including her 2 youngest children.
You'll hear every dramatic moment.
Money, power, and sex. That's what this case is about.
Just tell the truth. It's that simple.
The Doomsday Cult Mom Murder Trial. Coverage continues weekday mornings only on Court TV.
After being implicated by her siblings for the murder of her mother, Stacey Cananan faced the daunting task of trying to convince the jury that her version of what happened was the truth.
Part of her just couldn't wait to get it over with. But of course, she was also terrified because once it's over, if she doesn't get the verdict she wants, they were going for the death penalty.
Ms. Tennis, call your witness, please.
Defense would call Stacey Cananan.
We were all pretty surprised, I think, when Stacey took the stand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm?
By all accounts, all of these children were horrifically abused. Marilyn Cananan was horrifically abused. I think that the evidence is going to show you that that culture of abuse is going to leave you with a number of people who don't ever act the way non-abused people are going to act in any given situation. A lot of this is not going to make sense.
Calling your own defendant to the stand is a tough decision. You know, it's always a gamble.
To me, it was never a question. There were enough legitimate questions brought up by that evidence that I didn't think were going to go unanswered. Moving forward in time to the events that took place in the truck in the storage unit.
Yes.
So do you recognize the documents laying on the dashboard of that vehicle?
Yes, I do.
And did you write that document?
Yes, I did.
The creepy part of this case is that Richard Sr., you know, all 6'4" of them, of evil, really, loomed over that courtroom. One of the most shocking points in the testimony to me about Richard Sr. was one night when he had taken his girls for a drive. He stopped at a bar, got hammered.
How old would you have been?
6th grade, I'm not sure of the age. Then he decided, well, we'll go back home. I don't know, it was after the bar closed, 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning. And when we came in the house, my sister went to where we had our bunk beds. He told my mother, you're not sleeping in the room with me. Stacy's going in the room with me. My brother was sleeping in the living room on a pull-out sofa at that time. We went in the bedroom, he locked the door, he pulled out a handgun, and then he raped me with the gun in my mouth.
The way that this affected Stacey is that she learned to just shut up and just be as invisible as possible.
Tell the jury, what did you learn when you were a child about defending yourself?
The more you fought back, the more you argued, the worse you got beaten or raped or whatever the abuse was of the day.
Staying passive and doing what she was told was a strategy that helped Stacey survive years of her father's horrific abuse. But on the day of the interrogation, that strategy failed when she was confronted by a manipulative and suicidal brother bent on taking her down with him.
This was her brother, her protector. Suddenly she's hearing he's a murderer. She didn't know how to react to this because this was a new circumstance. Ricky convinced her that the police are going to arrest them both. They're going to go to jail.
She finds out that law enforcement, in fact, thinks mom is dead and perhaps buried in her yard, and that her brother had something to do with it, and there's $100,000 missing, and your hands are all over this. And she's got her girlfriend of 15 years who she knows is going to be swept up in this. Susan benefited from the money. The body's also in Susan's backyard.
At this point, Stacey was so overwhelmed
When do you recall there being the first conversation about there being an actual suicide attempt?
He told me that because Susan and I own that house, and because that body was going to be found in my backyard, if I didn't kill myself or do something to myself, that they surely would come after Susan also.
She was just sort of tired and out of it and didn't really know what was going on, was just trying to sort of get this over with. And somehow Richard apparently convinces Stacy that the only way out is to kill themselves.
When she wrote the suicide note, what she explained she meant by the line, "We had a part in Mother's leaving," is she felt genuinely responsible that if she hadn't invited Ricky to live with them, their mom would still be alive.
Coming up, the jury hears about a disturbing draft of a novel written by Ricky called Scales of Justice.
Flesh and the small lines of blood roll down the arm and drips down. They look at you trying to find compassion, mercy, but all they see is dark pools of hell.
It's very, very graphic, and diving into that sort of dark mind was really jarring and really uncomfortable.
The jury had seen testimony into what the defense claimed was the mind of Ricky the Manipulator. Now, the jurors were about to look deep into what the defense claimed was the mind of a murderer.
It was a handwritten document, about this thick, stack of papers, and it was called The Scales of Justice.
The draft novel was discovered by Susan and Stacy, who turned it over to police after Ricky was first arrested. It contained chilling descriptions of its main character killing child abusers with his bare hands.
To see the fear in the eyes as you squeeze their throat, as the larynx is being crushed. In it, he tells a story of a young man who grows up to save abused children.
The way the victims in his novel were bound had eerie similarities to how Marilyn's body was found.
You see them trying to cry out, but the duct tape works so well. Their hands and feet spread eagle and tied down so very little movement can happen.
This book is, in part, autobiographical, correct?
Some of it is what happened in Marilyn's childhood, yes.
If you look at the 200-page manuscript that he wrote, this is more than just a guy with a bad history who wants to write a quasi-autobiographical novel. This is a really kind of disturbed person. The main character's father's name is Richard, correct?
I guess so.
And it's about an abused child who kills his abusive parent?
Yes.
I think at the core of it, this man may seriously, genuinely be very mentally ill.
After casting doubt on the sanity of the state's star witness, Tennis next turned her attention towards the main weakness of its case against Stacy.
The prosecution really had a tough job here. Their evidence was pretty much circumstantial. They had nothing directly to tie Stacy to this crime.
Good afternoon, Detective.
Afternoon, Miss Tennis.
One of the things I was most impressed with Diana Tennis about is that when she was interviewing Detective Hussey on the stand, she was able to, through a series of very common sense questions, show that he hadn't done his job.
You know, I think a lot of it didn't add up. Missing persons had a case that had gone somewhat cold as far as where to find this missing woman, correct?
Correct.
And so they give it to the new kid on the block to play with.
Yes, ma'am, they did.
I think the jury ultimately wanted something other than Ricky to tell them how this thing went down. That doesn't mean that the cut ends of the tape could not have been swabbed and tested for DNA, correct?
I don't know that. You'd have to talk to the crime scene people. I'm not sure.
Did you ever talk to anybody about having that tape tested for DNA?
I don't recall. I think that the CSI television shows have hurt us. And the jurors are all lay people. They obviously don't know a lot about physical evidence and how it's collected and what it means and things like that.
When you don't send a single piece of evidence to the crime lab to even try to give the jury something forensic, something scientific to hold on to. I think they hold that against the prosecution.
Then Diana Tennis turned to Detective Hussey's testimony about the allegedly nefarious garage sale.
The garage sale. Oh my gosh. I don't even know what to say about the yard sale other than I don't even know what to say about the yard sale. At the time that you went by to look at the garage sale, had you ever been in Susan and Stacy's home?
No, ma'am.
They don't have a witness to say, I was at the yard sale and one of Mom's eagles was labeled with a dollar sign. They had a detective who went by and said there was Disney stuff for sale and evidence that Mom collected Disney stuff.
But Stacy and Susan also loved Disney collectibles.
And in fact, you were never able to actually determine whether any of the Disney stuff you saw at the garage sale was Disney stuff that belonged to Mom.
No, ma'am, I wasn't.
I guess the assumption that the jury was supposed to leap to was that my client was selling Mom's stuff for dollars and that would be a motive for having killed her. Now, the conversation where you talked to Richard Cunanan about the actual facts surrounding the killing of his mother takes up 3 transcribed pages. Does that sound about right?
It's been a while since I've looked at that, but sounds about right.
It was as the trial was going on that this picture of Marilyn was getting, for me, clearer than it had ever been before. And he tells you that they go to the 6 o'clock showing of Charlie's Angels at the Dollar Theater on Colonial in Orlando, Florida, correct?
Charlie's Angels too, I believe.
That's right. She is not a woman who would have done what Richard claims they did on that night of the week at that time in her life. It just doesn't jive.
Like going to a 6 o'clock movie when Marilyn would normally just be headed home from work.
I will have to admit that didn't actually occur to me until after Detective Hussey's testimony. It actually occurred to me while he was testifying and she was waving the document around.
That document was an E-Pass record showing Marilyn's location the evening that Ricky claimed the murder took place.
You talked yesterday about the E-Pass transponder records, correct? Do you recall talking about that yesterday?
Yes, I do.
And you recall talking about the last transponder entry on September 10, 2003 at 5:53 in the afternoon, where she would have been located at University and 417, correct?
That's correct.
Well, you knew already that Marilyn Cunanan was not at a 6 o'clock movie on December 10th, correct?
I don't know that. What?
Well, she's either in a movie theater at 6 o'clock, per Richard's story, or she's 20 minutes away from home on her way back in her car, per the E-Pass records. And so she's not home until, call it 6:15. You knew that she was somebody who wore work clothes to work and not work clothes to not work, correct?
I did find that out later, yes.
So she would have had to, at the very least, change clothes, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then they would have had to have gotten to the theater, correct?
Yes.
So a 6 o'clock movie just flat out didn't happen, right?
Probably.
I don't think it made or broke the case, but I think it was a part of his picture that just didn't ring true.
Coming up, the defense and prosecution rest their case, the media settles in for a long night, and then
the phone call came in. The jury's back already. We've all heard that when a jury comes back fast, that's a guilty verdict.
A minister gunned down.
Now, a New Hampshire man stands trial for murder.
Prosecutors say they have fingerprint evidence found on a Glock handgun near the crime scene that links Castiglione to Garcia's death.
The defendant was allegedly found praying over the victim's body.
Court TV cameras are taking you inside the courtroom for every dramatic moment.
The murdered minister trial. Live coverage next week following jury selection on Court TV.
That last day of trial was really long. We were all like ready to go to bed, basically.
Stacy and Susan and Diana, they went out to dinner just down the block from the courthouse.
My fiance calls it the last dinner, that waiting for the verdict. We're all over at that Italian restaurant together, and it's anxiety. I was very, very, very scared. You know, they read the word guilty, she gets cuffed, she gets taken to jail, and she's never getting out again.
Late into the evening, the jury was sent out to deliberate. It's a Florida thing. They don't break and come back the next day, in my experience. We often stay late.
So when the phone call came in, you know, Diana said, the jury's back already. It had only been a couple hours. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but it was that same night they came back in.
It's always a procedure. You know, the jury comes into the room and it's not instant.
The jury gave the papers to the clerk gave it to the judge read it, gave it back to the clerk.
You'll publish the verdict.
And she's just waiting. And then when they read for this count, yada, 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 case number, et cetera, et cetera.
State of Florida versus Stacy Kinanen. Verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. So say we all, this 12th day of March 2010 at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, signed by the foreperson.
Do you want to poll the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Poll the jury, please.
I'm going to call you by your badge number.
Well, I'm a crier, so I immediately start the waterworks because that's what I do.
Yes, ma'am.
I think she cried too. I think we were both somewhat surprised, and I think we were both incredibly relieved.
If you want to wait for your paperwork, you can. If not, you're free to go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
It was this beautiful moment. I hate to say that about a murder trial, but it really was. It was a stunning moment.
For Detective Hussey, the verdict came as a surprise.
I adhere to the philosophy that it's better to let a guilty person walk than it is to put an innocent person in jail.
But for Cheryl, the exoneration was a shock.
Let's go. All right, baby.
My sister's there with her suit and her supporters. And, you know, my brother fit the package that they wanted to fit. He looked like the murderer and he looked like the horrible person. And let's just tie this all up and put it on a bow and send him away, and we won't have to think about this anymore. I know in my heart that justice wasn't done. No doubt in my mind.
That was so wonderful.
Coming up, Stacy tries to put the trial behind her and forgive her brother for implicating her in the death of their mother.
She was devastated because this was her brother and they'd been through so much together and he'd always been her protector.
After being exonerated, Stacy Kinanen returned to Florida, where she has tried to put it all behind her. The death of her mother, the trauma of being accused as an accomplice in the murder of her parents, and a trial that could have ended in her execution.
She really just wants to move on with her life. That's the reason I'm doing this for her, because I know the story probably better than anyone else other than maybe Susan.
Despite being cleared of all charges, Stacy remains haunted by the shadow of the monster.
She couldn't get a job that would pay her well and treat her with respect because all anybody had to do was Google her name. And boom, there you've got a murder suspect. So she had a really hard time finding good work.
The trial also put incredible stress on her relationship with Susan, who is currently being treated for cancer.
It wasn't just Stacy's life that was being affected by this, but she still stuck by her side, and you know, they're together to this day. They didn't let this tear them apart.
She has yet to fully recover from her older brother's betrayal.
On one hand, she was devastated because this was her brother and they'd been through so much together and he'd always been her protector. She couldn't believe that he was doing this. On the other hand, she's fully aware that Ricky, even though he may have committed murder and he may have done all these crimes, he didn't really stand a chance from day one. How else could he possibly have turned out?
If there's one person Stacy is bitter about, it's Detective Hussey.
Oh, she absolutely felt victimized by him. She felt as if he had a vendetta against her specifically. This wasn't just professional interest. He had it in for her. He wanted to nail a suspect, and he didn't care how he did it.
This wasn't a top-notch, we're going to just investigate the heck out of this until we get to the truth. This was, I'm pissy that I don't have probable cause. I'm going to tell her I'm not happy about that. And then 4.5 years later, when Crazy Richard tells me what I want to hear, I'm going to run off and get an indictment. It sends a shiver up my spine when I think about how she could have gotten railroaded for not just one, but 2 murders that from the beginning she said I didn't have anything to do with, and that they've really never had what I would consider to be solid evidence.
Testifying in court about the horrific abuse that she and her siblings suffered at the hands of their father brought that painful abuse back to life. But it also led Stacy to get help and begin to heal from the monstrous actions of the one person she believes to be most responsible for the death of their mother.
If he hadn't been the person he was, none of this would have happened. Ricky would not have become who he became. One of his biggest fears is becoming his own father, and he tried not to. He genuinely tried not to. And in many ways he did not, but in enough ways he did.
Ricky Kinanen remains here at the Zephyr Hills Medium Security Correctional Institution. He has served most of his 30-year sentence and is scheduled to be released in June of 2029.
Stacy mourns the loss of her sister. She would like to have a relationship with her sister. She wanted to, but they were never able to repair it.
I don't feel justice was served, but she's my sister, just like Ricky's my brother. It's not gonna bring my mom back or my dad, but a part of me loves him. You can't live the way that we did and come out of it normal. There's no way.